Jimmy Cliff. In 1973, Jimmy Cliff rode with me and Mrs. Alexis as we rounded Cherry Hill's breaded green forehead. We eased out the car radio and planted biblical lions and atrium-filled whales in my tender head. The car plumb full with sound. How I wanted the rhythm to continue as we approached Market Square, dropping down towards fish-scaled scarlet roofs and the country women behind fold-out tables laden with fruit pyramids and my original English. When the car faded to a stop in front of Maria's beauty salon, Jimmy's voice drifted into daybreeze. The Afro age sat crowded in vans pretending to be buses. Everyone bathed in island time. James Brown. I'm on the train with a rail riding woman whose sable hair is lustered like mine. The boxcar floors are iced against my head. Yes, it's true. My mother left before I could lace shoes. Jail is a no landing zone, a knot of fallen decisions, and guys with hard names who didn't flinch doing their business feet away from me. Even when I washed my hands ahead of the food tray, I knew I was one of them. The mind, how we stand outside it, old and unwanted. How each night we fall in our sleep. How somewhere there is abysmal pain. Something my voice calls from the wind. Howling wolf. I can hear the train coming, filled with smokestack lightning. Gold-winged sparks polishing this slate-black Mississippi night. Mama left before I could spell my name. I walked barefoot miles under telephone lines, followed them to Papa's towering hug. A dead man stepped out the graveyard and tuned my first guitar with spirit airs. Give me a standard blues progression in A, and I'll show you what misery is. Even near death, I could never half-ass the stage. Although I was a tree of a man, she made me cry last time I saw her. Scratched glass clear across my eyes. Called me Satan with my rolling hard living. Most don't know. Hell is a mama that never wanted you. Next poem is one of the great ambassadors of soccer and Brazil to the world, Pelé. I never allowed my feet to drift the way others did, even when my age occupied the area of two splayed hands. I placed flags and kicks in the collective mind slavery erected. I shattered racism's edge and introduced Brazil to itself, while Grinch and I were TV heroes, 2 of 11 disciples conducting sermons on pitches greener than our flag, the future's symbol. Its spinning globe shouts, Ordem e progresso, order and progress, through all the months of February. When this carnival nation started bleaching itself into oblivion, I ushered in acceptance of black players and distilled laughing sambas through the ball's movement. In a polyglot world where there's only one true language, and I'm its ambassador. Another poem from Brazil, a woman who was born in the favelas, the shanty towns of Brazil, who rose to become the most widely sold Brazilian author based on one book, and then tragically wound up back in the favelas. Benita da Silva. Sometimes I think I'm living backwards. Sink beneath wet concrete before I become the 5-year-old girl shouldering water up favela hills, working till night draws in. I still see my dead infant sons walk Mangueira's streets covered in blood cloths. Then day arrives bearing 2 white crosses and I rise to greet its hour. Race is the unspoken thing, a blank rift book ending conversations, a sharpened nail scratch beneath the eye. Other ministers want me to backseat it, to know my place. They say history won't forget me. My election wins have framed future monuments. The past can't be returned, but when you have jet skin, you know. Former state governor of Rio de Janeiro, I've come too far pressing this road to halt my tongue. Color is only what you think it is. And I must make a correction. Benedito de Silva was actually the first black governor and mayor of Rio de Janeiro. I had the names confused. Sorry about that. Okay, so the last poem I'll read is The Panthers, and this refers to the Black Panthers of the late 60s, early 70s. The Panthers. Because Watts was burning, I dashed watch chains and grabbed dish rack sinks filled with the back-cutting weight of my enslaved ancestors and buried everything into store windows, blasting my hand-tied Jim Crow past. All the covered-mouth rapes my mother's grandmothers endured, and flipped the Lord's shotgun back because I knew he couldn't exist, and let the safety clique speak up in public. Because Watts was burning, I became Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, packing intellectual heat in mist-filled Oakland dawns, thrusting the Bay's glacial bylaws back at pearl faces perched on painted lady porches, their eyes coding me behind police masks. I moved rocket fast and turned history, pounding the 60s when everything moved in Ozzie and Harriet time. Because Watts was burning, I climbed out of the weathered underground, launching the pyretic distaste of our soldiers felled in Vietnam, Korea, the gas-soaked trench lines that carved up Europe, returning to see fountains coupled with whites only, outside theaters, or clinging bat-mad to hotel sides. I couldn't choose bus seats, but they let me appoint my tree, and swung my brothers with hemp twine, swiveled their charred remains under Dixie suns, chasing nights black in knees. I was half-time in boardrooms and law offices, doing the janitor's ragtime jigsaw snowshoeing across marble, venting song and seeing toothless laughs, my children walking coatless to winter schools minus books. Because Watts was burning, I knotted history's apron strings and linked up with Stokely Carmichael and Angela Davis to seal the hot spot beatdown on racism's fireside flush. We blared our jive plot points on our half-erased, rasping story, how we remained horse-saddled in summer's cotton death fields, our sweat-sliced skin interred and spliced by color's flashpoints. We fly-kicked and cold-slapped cotton-hooded laws with upstart intensity. Because Watts was burning and turning charred brick back into black carbon, I rose to red glare wailing alarm clocks, clipped the magnum to my side, and finally decided to wake the hell up. Thank you.
You were listening to Michael Fraser reading his searing poems, poems that you could smell, poems that you could feel, poems that you could hear. Michael is an established poet who's won many awards. His second book of poems is coming out in March this year. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate it.
You are a part of my show, which is Living Multiculturalism with Mayank Bhatt. I've been talking to writers, poems, authors, musicians, people who do painting, who call themselves, by different categories, different ways. The emphasis of the show is always to provide a spotlight to people who do not find a voice in the mainstream.
I'm happy that you're doing that, I must say. We don't have enough exposure.
And the show is brought to you by TAG TV, which is again a multicultural platform created a couple of years ago. We have different shows, different sorts of, it's entertainment, it's education, it's information, everything that media should be doing. but does not do when it comes to, for any lack of other word, visible minorities. The show is also brought to you by Canadian Thinkers Forum. It's a forum that was established several years ago, and the forum tries to create a platform for debate on issues that are relevant to Canadian society. So once again, welcome to my show. And let me begin by asking you, what makes you write poetry?
Oh boy, that's a difficult question to answer. It reminds me of a line from Bob Marley when I guess someone asked him, when did you become a musician? And he said, when does the seed become a tree? Like, when does the bush become a tree? So I guess the seed was always there. And when I look at my musical family and just all the artists, I think a seed must have germinated from them somehow. In practical terms, when I actually started writing, probably 15, and I did the same thing that everyone, I think, does at some point in their life. You know, you're in grade 9 or 10 and you fall in love, and you write some silly poem about this person that you love, and that's how it started. My poems were horrible, and then one day I wrote a poem, and the teacher said, "Oh, this is fairly interesting, and you seem to have a poetic vision." And I was like, "What?" Which is very funny to me, because I remember when I was in grade 7, and we were studying Edgar Allan Poe, and we were reading The Raven, and there was this girl with red hair who sat in front of me. I remember her name was Leanne. She got it, and I swear I was reading calculus. While she was reading The Raven, I was reading calculus. I could not figure out what was going on in this thing. So the fact that I came around to start understanding poetry, start viewing it, I guess the way a poet might, it's quite miraculous to me, actually. When I look back at that kid in grade 7 who had no clue what was going on in any of the poems that we read in class.
I have read your first volume of poems, and at least 2 or 3 poems stay with me even today. I was discussing with you earlier about the Lawrence West bus.
Yes.
That was one. It kind of struck me immediately, because when I came to Canada about 8 years ago, I lived in a condo, a rented place on Keene Lawrence, and it gave me an absolutely panoramic view of the Lawrence Avenue. And this poem kind of, it touches me even today in so many different ways. The other poems that I remember had to do with your father, had to do with the car that he had. I realized that there is a very strong connection that you have with your dad. Would you like to talk about that?
Wow, you first guy just address Lawrence West bus.
Yes.
Yeah, I took that bus when I started teaching. I taught grade 7 at C.R. Marchand School, and yeah, I took the bus for 6 straight years. And as you know, especially nearing Dufferin, the bus can sometimes sit there for 10-15 minutes, and you have inclement weather where it could take you an hour to go from Lawrence West down to Weston Road. And yeah, so I had plenty of hours to sit there on that bus, and that poem was written over a few days on that bus and edited on that bus. So I'm happy you understand that bus. And so much of Toronto is that bus,
in
as you
so
mentioned.
many different ways, actually.
Yeah, it is. And it was interesting, as you go along the street, there are numbers at one point where it's like 1944 or 46. So it's like you're traveling through time, and you literally are, because you can see the different architectural notions that were in mind based on how various parts are constructed. There's newer construction, older construction. Different groups live in different places. So, and even over those 6 years, so much has changed along the street itself.
True.
So yeah, it was interesting, the whole microcosm of the world and Toronto on that bus, which is probably true for most buses and streetcars in Toronto. Just being the multicultural, multilayered, multilingual, multifaceted city that it is. Getting back to my father, I guess he was a typical Caribbean man for his time. 9 kids in the family. His mom left when she was fairly young to, I guess, live with another man. And the situation where, I guess by the age of 13, he was pretty much on his own. And he became a singer. He has a great voice, sort of sounds like Sam Cooke, a lot of people say. And along with that, growing up on your own in a society that is very misogynistic, became a fairly misogynistic man of that period. And yeah, there are many, I was born in Grenada, but I came to Canada when I was 5, and basically I consider myself Canadian. Obviously there's that Caribbean side of me, but I think like we were talking about Mumbai and Bombay, that Caribbean of, Lord, 45 years ago does no longer exist. So the time that I was in the Caribbean as a child, it no longer exists. So I can't go back to that. I can only say I'm pretty much Canadian of a Caribbean, Grenadian specifically experience. And also I went out west at age 7, so that changed me very much as well. But getting back to my father, he was a singer, met my mother. I think I'm an accident because they didn't marry till I was about 4 or so. Also, my mother had the opportunity, she was sponsored, luckily, by a Dr. Solway, who I guess knew one of her relatives, and she went to Canada when I was age 1, and that first poem about Jimmy Cliff refers to Miss Alexis, who I thought was my mother up until age 5. And everyone talked about my mother in Canada, but who's this person they're talking about? You're my mother. And she owned a beauty salon called Maria's Beauty Salon, downtown St. George's, Grenada, right by the market. And that's where we went every morning. So I also grew up in a hair salon and listening to women talk and complain about their men, and while they're mainly getting their hair straightened, which I have a whole other issue with. But I'm lucky because she was an anachronism for her time, a woman who owned her own business, very strong woman. And the other thing too, she, I think to this day, she's probably, if not the blackest person in terms of hue I've ever seen, would definitely be in the top 3 or 4. I mean, she was really dark. And I think that affected her on many levels in life, especially, being in the Caribbean, and of course, the lighter skinned you are, the better. So I think
that's a situation also in India.
Well, of course, yeah. So you know about bleaching creams and the rest of it, and so I think life for her was obviously not easy. It definitely wasn't easy, and to her credit, I think my intellectual pursuits gradually came about through her, although it took a while to emerge. And her daughter, who I thought was my sister, but is my cousin really, she's a professor of neurophysiology at the University of Massachusetts in Worcester, Massachusetts. And again, from this single mother who was very strong, she made 2 wonderful lives, or saved 2 wonderful lives. I think I'd be very different if I had not grown up with her for those 4 years.
Let's talk a bit about your teaching experience. You were saying that you prefer to be with children who are in risk.
Yes.
That must be fairly traumatic experience to go through every day. What drives you to do that?
Well, what I'm explaining to you, that my life, like I said, would be completely different. And a lot of these kids, through no fault of their own, are thrust in these situations where their families or the people who are in care of them basically have ignored them and have not done their jobs. And it's not their fault. So you have kids who think it's all right to be extremely rude to whoever. Plus, they have their backs up. They have to be tough, because in the environments in which they live, if you're not tough, people walk all over you. So you have to break that down. And beginning of every year is always difficult for that because they also have notions of what being black is, what being white is, and I don't sound the way most of the people who live in their neighborhood sound and what they see on, I don't know, World Star Hip Hop and BTV, on all these various media forms that they consume. So I have to get through to them that it's okay to want to learn, first of all. It's okay to make mistakes as you're trying to learn. And it's okay to actually want more than what everyone thinks you should be. And it's very difficult. Usually, I spend usually the first 2 months just trying to build that rapport. Because especially with these kids, they're not going to come into class and sit there and listen to you just because that's what the regular kid does, because they've been conditioned to do that. No. These kids come in and quite often they will go out of their way to make your life hell because they want you, I guess, to be confrontational with them because that's what happens and that's what they're used to. And so, it does, I have two of my own kids. And some days I come home, I'm just like, oh my God. Today was tough. And especially when you listen to other teachers might complain, oh God, the class was so tough today. I just couldn't believe they were talking and blah, blah, blah. And I'm looking, what, no one told you to F off or where to go? No one picked up something and threw a desk right? So it's a totally different environment.
The important point or the important aspect of all this is that, while doing something that is tremendously tough, you continue to nourish and nurture a certain sensitivity that makes you a very successful poet.
Oh, in what way? I'm curious. This insight.
Your poems and the ones that you read are definitely very political, but there is, in so many different ways, there is a certain level of sensitivity that comes through, even in the most political ones, where you're trying to describe an emotion that everybody experiences but does not verbalize.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to always look at two sides to when we say being objective. And unfortunately today we live in a time where objectivity has been thrown out the window. I guess being contrarian is in. Being fundamentalist in every respect seems to just pervade our society. So for example, just looking at what's happening in the States with I guess the past 8 years, the Republicans, their entrenchant animosity and enmity towards Obama is just ridiculous. I mean, 20 years ago, no one would treat a president the way, I mean, it's beyond the pale the way he's been treated. And also from people who are on the left. I mean, I'm on Facebook like you, and there are some eminent friends we both have who, right off the get-go, were attacking Obama for not being what they thought he would be. But no other president has had to endure what he's had to endure. And
I have two questions for you.
Yes.
And this pertains to what is happening in the South, especially with Obama presidency. Do you think the opposition to him stems from two very basic characteristics that he has, or at least perceived characteristics? One is that he's black, and nobody can deny that, and the other is the perception that he's a Muslim.
The Muslim part I'm not as sure about, because I think that's more a thing of the Tea Party, which I don't think your average conservative believes that. But everybody in the Tea Party does, regardless of how educated they are or not, right? And Ted Cruz obviously utilized that to his advantage until now when Trump is going to attack him for being born outside of America. But anyways, with regards to him being black, yes. And that's a whole other thing as well. Technically, he's black in America because he's got more than one drop of black blood. But that notion that this man who is mixed is black, that in itself is problematic because we're not viewing the whole person, and that is one of the problems with prejudice and racism and America in general. They don't view black people as people. They're not viewing this president as a whole person. It's hard to see the whole person when you have this stigma. And I think, yeah, of course he's black, but isn't he half Irish? I mean, it's ridiculous. It really is.
Is this an issue also in Canada? And I don't mean just with black people, I mean in general.
Yeah, I think Canada is very complex with regards to that. Friends and I have argued about this with regards to racism in Canada versus the States and others. Oh, the States is better. At least they know, you know where you stand, blah, blah, blah. And I've always argued, well, no, I prefer the Canadian version. I don't want to say it's better, but I would. The good thing about the Canadian version is that we generally don't have neighborhoods. There were in the past, but now you can definitely, for the most part, if you have the money, it's all about class more than anything. Pretty much live where you want. We're not as segregated to that same degree, and because of that, we interact more. And because of that interaction, over time, the prejudices gradually break down. And I saw it for myself, just basically all through my life. I came here in the mid 70s, 74, with a lot of other, I guess, first generation multicultural people, racialized people. And yeah, from the late 70s till now, it's a world of difference. There are other issues at the fore, but and definitely things like, obviously, hunting for jobs, your name is going to have a great impact on you. The more racialized your name is, the more ethnic your name is, obviously it's going to have an impact. But at the same time, so is your height. I'm short. I've been short all my life. I know and that's had an impact with regards to.
I'm shorter than you.
Okay, but people will, in terms of a leadership role, we just know that the taller you are, generally, the more people see you in that role. And I read a lot of psychology, again, to help me with my students, and I know these things, right? But here in Canada, the fact that we interact means we can get to know each other, and that is pivotal. And it reminds me of a racist neighbor I had who he liked me and 2 or 3 other black people, but he hated all the other ones, which it's like, I like you, Mike, but, some of it. But here's the thing, right? Although he was born in the Azores, he has a certain way of viewing the world. But we would talk, and I guess due to my interest in Brazil, and I knew some Portuguese, and I'm fairly well-read. And so he was shocked when I knew about his country and the politics and everything else. Even knowing about fado music, and I talked about the great fado artists, how do you know all this stuff? But just, that would not happen in the States. There's no way in hell that would happen. I mean, the large Portuguese community in Boston, they live where they live, and the blacks live in Roxbury. It's not going to happen. And the only place it could happen would be at work, and people are usually too busy working to really spend time chatting and interacting.
That brings me to the question that I wanted to ask you as part of this chat is what is your fascination? Why is this fascination with Brazil? Okay,
I will address this. I just want to finish off what I was just going to say about that racist neighbor that we had. The thing was, he had 3 young kids, and one of them I'd play soccer with, and his kids, their view of things were very different, right? And obviously then their kids' view of things will be different. It also reminds me of a good friend I had in high school, Antonetta, she was Italian, and back in those days, I remember asking her, if you dated a black guy or someone who was not Italian even, she's like, my dad would kill me. Which back then was probably true. But, I know her now, we're still friends on Facebook, and that would not, for her kids, that would never be an issue. And I know that for a fact. I know this person. I grew up with her. The reason why we're having this conversation, she was actually dating a South Asian guy and just did not want her father to know. And yeah, they went out for about a good 2-3 years, you know, and I guess their father never knew. So, and then there was another Italian girl who eventually wound up marrying this South Asian guy, and I guess the father eventually came around. So again, these types of things, I guess they have more with my generation, definitely probably more so with younger people. But it's not going to happen if people can't live and interact around each other, go to the same clubs, and you know, I think there's far more interaction. So we're building, I think the fruits of our labor here will eventually show probably in another 50 years or 60 years. And the American type of very stringent racial divisions, I think, doesn't really make sense here for a lot of people. I'm not saying racism does not exist here. Obviously, I've experienced it countless times. A year doesn't go by without, you know, you experience it, me. It's far more subtle, but, you know, it happens. It's happened to me at magazine stores where I'm the only one asked, you know, are you going to buy that magazine or not? And I'm looking, what about all these guys? And I remember that was at Young and St. Clair at a magazine shop. And I always used to go in there, but after work, and I'd have like a blazer on, so I looked more professional. But the one day I came from the gym in the tracksuit, it was like, hey. Suddenly I was persona non grata, yeah. But no, I wasn't the urban hip black guy. All of a sudden, I was a street thug. All of a sudden, so yeah, so it does happen. But Brazil, I think my fascination with Brazil honestly started from a late night. It was in Edmonton, Alberta. I think it was 11 or 12. I snuck downstairs to watch some TV, and they were showing Black Orpheus and the music. They were playing samba, and I just loved it. It was the first time I ever heard samba. But then the next time, I think it was in grade 10 in high school, and then I started researching it, the African roots of it, and especially when I learned that Brazil received more slaves than any other country in the Americas, I was like, wow. And on many levels, like Brazilian culture is very African. But then I met some Brazilians who were black, and their vision of race, their view of, I guess, the African influence in Brazil was quite interesting. And I remember talking, because then at the time my sister was doing her PhD in NYU, and I remember visiting her, and we talked about it, and she actually had many intellectual friends, and one was a Brazilian scholar. And here's a guy, NYU, and I got to walk around Soho with him for a good afternoon talking about Brazil and just how they view race and culture, and it's very different. Race there is very different. Here in North America, it is sanguineal. It's based on your blood, your bloodline. So who your parents are determines your race. So you could be as white as, I don't know, as white as any news anchor, as white as any news anchor on Fox. And if they find out your mom's half black, you're black, right? Brazil does not work that way. Brazil, you could have 10 kids from, let's say, a black parent and a white parent, and they could all be 10 different shades, and there's 10 different names for them. So what you look like determines your race. So it's very different, which means that on some level, race is more fluid. But what's interesting was this added notion that how far you reach in life also influences your race. So there was, I remember reading from one of the great Brazilian scholars. It was the book, The Big House and the Small House, and which was talking about the plantation. And he talked about how there was this black doctor. He was considered black before he became a doctor. But once he became a doctor and he was allowed to inhabit and walk around, I guess, the higher echelons within real society, they started considering him white, which I found very interesting. And I experienced it myself with Brazilians. And one of the worst things was we had a capoeira instructor. It's a Brazilian martial art that was created by slaves. And we were learning from him. He had very curly hair. No one here in Canada would consider him white. But in Brazil, he was considered white. But he eventually, I guess, was caught up in the immigration. You overstayed your visa too long, come with us. So while he was in detention, only one person really would go to see him. It was a very black Brazilian friend of his, right? So when he was there and his girlfriend finally went, I guess she would go see him obviously as well. And he complained to her, he said, no one would come to see me. It was like, yeah, but what about Ronaldo? He'd always come to see you. Oh, but he's a black. Like these were so it was just interesting seeing the way they view race versus the way people in the Caribbean view it, because we have our whole issue about the lighter you are generally. It's very similar to Brazil, but of course we have the whole it's in your blood, right? It doesn't matter what you look like. If someone is black in your history, you're black. Yeah, so I found that very interesting. Plus the music, it's just so infectious. And I actually played percussion on 2 or 3 Brazilian floats during Caravana over a few years. The last one was I think it was probably the last shooting they had, and we were the last float that was let through. I remember playing, and there's waves of people in front of you, but they started to move like a wave, and people were right away, and you saw enforcement officers coming. I remember I'm there playing, and I was thinking, this is the last time I do this, because I remember I was standing, and then I started crouching. But yeah, culturally, the music, there was just something about it. And in terms of playing in a carnival, they're called samba schools. So we had our own little one here in Toronto. There's so many people involved that you just have to play a little part if you're playing the music. So someone who's musically inept as I am could just grab a little, I would play the go-go bells, just learn a simple pattern. That's all I had to learn. So you can start with a simple pattern, you can contribute, you can be part of this. And on Sundays, it was also have something called pagode, which everyone would join in. You'd bring an instrument. And again, if you can't play as really good as the Brazilians could play, you could just do the basic pattern. You were part of it. So it was easy to join. Culturally, they're a very easy culture to be sort of an associate of, which was a lot of fun. And I love their soccer. That was the other thing, too. I think, can't remember who said it, but if your team or country's not in the World Cup, the default is Brazil, especially if you're black or of a marginalized community. It's like Brazil represented everybody. And of course, they played the best up until recently. So,
I want to end the show by asking you to talk about your forthcoming book.
Okay. Was I pontificating for it? Seemed like I was only talking for 2 minutes.
I think that's the whole point of having you here.
And I say I'm shy, believe it or not. Yes, the book is called To Greet Yourself Arriving, and the line actually comes from a poem by, and even though I've been talking all this time, suddenly his name slips me, believe it or not, the great Caribbean poet Derek Walcott. So it's from his great poem, Love After Love. And yeah, and I love that poem, and in that line, to greet yourself arriving. And it's basically, I look at various black historical figures. It's very self-indulgent. These are the black historical figures I like. And there are a lot of the usual ones, the Rosa Parks and people like that. But then there are others who aren't very unusual. I do have many Brazilians, for example, people from Latin America. We seem to ignore the fact that it's literally like 100 million black Latin Americans. And it's kind of, well, they're Latino, but yeah, but they're black. Like, how do they make the difference? And they're going through a lot of the same racism that everyone else is going through, and it's in many cases a lot worse. Like it's hard to be black in Cuba. And I know when I went down there and I talked to the black Cubans and the way they were being treated, and I think you talk to other kids, oh, there's no racism here, which is what Brazilians say as well. And I don't know if you've been noticing what's going on in Brazil now with the riots. Oh my God. And yeah, and the riots, the protests the other day, you had 200,000 people calling for Dilma to resign, and they were all white. But then last night, you had another 200,000 come out, and it was the 55% of the population that's more mixed and black, right? So Brazil has to actually reckon with what's going on. So do a lot of Latin American countries. who speak Spanish have to acknowledge what's going on and how people are, it's structurally, it's structural. People are being disenfranchised just based on their skin color, and that's all there is to it. I've seen some Brazilian TV. You don't see one black person unless it's a telenovela, which is a soap opera, and they're always, they're the help, or they're never in any powerful position, or they're never a protagonist, or so yeah, they've got to address all this, and it's good that it's finally coming to the fore. But getting back to the book, yeah. So I look at things like that. It's very pressing in what's happening these days, because I also look at the Jim Crow South, but I also look at what's happened with the 13th Amendment, because I saw a wonderful documentary called Slavery by Another Name. And after I saw it, slavery didn't end until 1942. We think it ended in 1886, but no, it ended in 1942. The Jim Crow South was slavery, it was just by another name. And it's just incredible what happened. The 13th Amendment basically says no one can be indentured slave or be put under slavery unless you are incarcerated. And it was that stipulation immediately after Abraham Lincoln was killed that the South exploited. So you have all these workers who were now, they were sharecroppers, but what would happen around harvest time, suddenly black people were being rounded up all over the place on these trumped up charges. It was like, oh, you can't walk on that side of the street, it's Sunday. Black people aren't allowed to walk down the side of the street. These laws existed in the South. So they would round up all these poor people, and then they would have to go work and harvest. And the state would loan them out. It's called convict leasing. And it's going on today with the whole for-profit prisons, which the Republicans are championing. It's incredible what's going on. It's absolutely incredible. And there was some judge in, I think it was it Arkansas? They finally charged, he had a high incarceration rate. And he was hooked up to one of these for-profit prisons. For-profit prison. They loan out workers. I shouldn't say loan out. People hire their workers. Yeah. But anyways, yeah. So there's that. I look at people like Joe Fraser. Everyone lauds Muhammad Ali, who should be revered. But what Muhammad Ali did to Joe Fraser is just, there are no words for it. I mean, because Joe Fraser was darker. He was working class background. So if you look at the whole thrill in the middle thing, he's always, yeah, he's dark, I'm light. He was actually championing that. And that had a great impact on Joe Fraser. It had a great impact on Joe Fraser's kids. His kids were actually ridiculed in school. So, I do, like, again, that sensitivity. I look at various things, these great people that we put up on pedestals. Well, what happens when they may say something contrary to another person who probably should be held up as an honorable person and an icon. So I hold Joe Fraser up. You don't see Muhammad Ali in my book. So yeah, and I think I introduced people to a lot of Canadian, black Canadian heroes who should be mentioned. And there are, I believe, 23 of them. One big thing, we had hockey league, the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes, established in 1885, 22 years before the NHL. Their style of hockey had such a great impact on Canadian hockey, and nobody knows about it. Nobody knows about it. So I'd like all these things to come out. The slap shot was invented by a lot of these black hockey players in the Maritimes. Prior to them doing it, it did not exist. So just even Canadiana, we have a lot of influence, and we have our contributions, and they should be acknowledged. Simple as that. And that's what this book is doing, as long as hopefully introducing people to new icons, new political situations they're aware of, especially in Brazil and Panama and various other places. So, it's quite a dynamic book. I like it.
That's important.
Hope you like it. Actually, I love the cover. The people at Tightrope Books I bow to them. Every day I look at that cover and I say, I will be proud championing this book. I wish it was published now so I could hold it up so the audience
We'll have
could
you
see.
back again, don't worry.
Good, I hope so.
Thank you for being with us, Michael, today.
Thank
I
you.
hope you enjoyed talking to me.
It looks like I enjoyed it.
You were watching Michael Fraser, an established poet, an award-winning poet. His forthcoming book is out March 2016. Thank you for joining us today. You were watching Living Multiculturalism with Mayank Bhatt. This is Tag TV. The program is brought to you by Canadian Thinkers Forum. As always, I end the show with a request. Write to us. We are looking for your suggestions. Who do you want me to interview? Who do you want me to feature on the show? This is your show. Let's make it so. Thank you.
#1 multicultural channel. This is Tag TV.